system for capitalists, shareholders. But for the population, it created a lot of wealth, very even income and wealth distribution, very high growth, and very rapidly raised quality of life and standards of living.
In 1959 alone, the economy expanded by 17%. But a result of the war economy system was that entire industrial sectors would compete not for profit, but for market share. Companies would fight until bankruptcy to gain market share. This phenomenon was soon recognized and called excess competition. The solution was the creation of explicit or implicit cartels. In the banking sector, window guidance acted as the cartel control mechanism, because the Bank of Japan could dictate the number and value of loans that banks issued. As a result, bank rankings never changed during the post-war era, except after mergers. According to one banker, if it were not for window guidance, we would compete until harakiri.
The U.S. current account deficit surges to its highest level in 9 years. The size of the increase took many economists by surprise.
While cartels controlled competition within Japan, there were no such limits when it came to international markets. Japanese corporations soon became dominant in many markets in the world. In America, formal congressional hearings were held under the title Japanese Productivity Lessons for America. Leading economic theories indicate that only free markets can lead to success. But Japan rose within decades to become the second largest economy in the world, without relying only on the invisible hand of free markets. Japan's post-war economy was a fully mobilized war economy, with production shifted from weapons to consumer goods. Since the Bank of Japan presented itself as a champion of free markets, window guidance was an embarrassment. Official publications either failed to mention it or downplayed its role by calling the credit controls voluntary. Whenever the Ministry of Finance would inquire about the Bank of Japan's credit creation and allocation policy, Bank of Japan staff would engage in complex discussions, full of technical jargon, to make the process appear impenetrable to non-experts. In November 1965, the first batch of Japanese government bonds came onto the market. From now on, when politicians wanted to spend more, they would no longer put pressure on the Bank of Japan, but instead exert it on the Ministry of Finance. So the ministry would ultimately preside over an ever-increasing national debt mountain. The 1980s was an era of financial deregulation in the industrialized world. Most industrialized countries lifted their restrictions on the movement of capital. In Japan, Tadashi Sasaki, a former governor of the Bank of Japan, called for a 5-year plan for the transformation and liberalization of the Japanese economy. Then, in 1986, the Advisory Group on Economic Restructuring, headed by the former Bank of Japan governor, Haruo Maekawa, proposed a 10-year economic reform plan designed to make the living standards of Japanese more comparable to those enjoyed in the West. The proposal stated that the time has now come for Japan to make a historical transformation in its traditional policies on economic management and the nation's lifestyle. There can be no further development for Japan without this transformation. The report read like a wish list by US trade negotiators. It started with calls for administrative reform and the abolition of bureaucratic powers. The goal was the transformation of the entire body politic, the abolition of the war economy system, and the introduction of a US-style free market economy. Those members of the advisory group who uttered dissent were relieved of their duties. Reports in the press were highly critical. Observers recognized the radical nature of the plan. It seemed far too ambitious. It was calling for a wholesale revolution of all parts of the Japanese economic, political, and social system. Although the report was clear about what was wanted, it was embarrassingly silent about how these goals would be achieved. The only clue hidden in the report was, in the implementation of these recommendations, fiscal and monetary policy have a significant part to play.
The Bank of Japan has always been on the record arguing that this typical Japanese system that we're so familiar with should be scrapped. It just should be entirely scrapped, and US-style capitalism should be introduced. Now, whether you agree with that or not is an entirely separate question, but the Bank of Japan certainly thinks it should be scrapped. And now the next question is, how do you do that? Well, the Ministry of Finance has been legally in control for most of the post-war era. We've got entrenched bureaucratic structures, politicians, and all these cartels and so on. That was the old system. Well, history teaches a system changes only fundamentally if there's a crisis.
The Commission proposed that monetary policy should be used to promote a historic crisis, sufficiently large to overcome the vested interests of the Ministry of Finance, politicians, and corporate Japan. Every system has groups that benefit from it, and hence have no desire to change it. There is probably no country in the world that has changed its economic, social, and political system in a significant way without a crisis. It is the crisis that convinces citizens and interest groups of the need for change.
Well, and how can you achieve this? Well, you need a crisis. And the best way to create it is to have a bubble, because that's how nobody stops you.